Today's guest speaker is John Cardillo, Assistant Director of Career Services at NYU Tandon School of Engineering. In his role, he helps students land jobs and internships while also liaising with employers to hire students and conduct workshops to help make students career ready. John, at this time, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you very much, Alexandra. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking with you. Today, our presentation is going to be focused on getting your job search started. What I'm envisioning we'll go over today is a little bit about job search strategy, including setting clear goals, how to target different companies in your search, searching for the right positions, keeping track of your search. I'll give you some high-level tips and best practices for resume writing and cover letter writing. We'll go over some general tips for, optimizing your LinkedIn profile. And we'll also go over some tips and some strategy for virtual networking and informational interviewing. Everything here is meant to help us get to a point where you're getting consistent interviews for positions when you're applying and networking. So that'll be what a lot of our content focuses on. I kindly ask everyone, if you have questions, to please save them for the end of the presentation, and I'll be happy to answer each one as soon as we're done. So when it comes to your overall job search, I think one of the first things we should always start with is setting clear-cut goals for ourselves and the activity that we perform in our job search. I would say, when it comes to activity, the things you're trying to do to move your job search along, at least for what we're talking about for today, from the point of, applying and setting up your search to the point where you're getting interviews, our activity is really going to be focused on how we're applying, the strategy that goes beyond that, and also networking. So for all of us here, no matter what your background is, no matter what your career level might be, I think that having a strategy that includes robust job applications is always going to be a very smart decision to get your search started. For typically, I would say if you're running a full-time search, you want to target something like 25 to 30 applications per week. A lot of that is going to be dependent on the types of positions you're applying for. Obviously, there might be more positions available for, let's say, a software engineer than a mid-career level construction management professional. So as close as you can get to that number as possible, I think is always going to be a good thing for us. I also think that we should be setting clear-cut goals when it comes to our networking activity. We'll be going over how to conduct informational interviews and how that can be part of a healthy, robust job search strategy. So I think in terms of the number of people we're looking to reach out to, if it's something like 10 to 15 new connections per week, trying to solicit those conversations and have them to help us move our job search forward will certainly be a good target to include. And especially now that we have the opportunity to do more networking events within our respective industries, if we can attend one or two events like that per month, whether they're online or in person, that's always going to be a good way to get things started. And again, just having some practical, attainable goals, even if you're looking at your activity week to week, which is the way that I do it, if you have a target that you want to set for yourself, activity that you can perform, and you keep yourself honest and accountable when it comes to those things, that can help you move your search forward without any issue. So one of the first things that comes into mind when it comes to looking for different opportunities is targeting specific companies. We will talk about targeting positions on job boards, but I also think that if you're working in a certain industry and you have certain companies that you're interested in, creating something that we call a target company list can be a great way to set some kind of foundation for the types of organizations you're looking for in specific industries. If you're brand new to an industry, let's say you're interested in companies that are working in sustainability in some capacity. Some good ways to start looking for those types of positions or those types of organizations could be Googling best of lists, best of companies in certain industries. If you are targeting positions in certain geographic areas, for example, if you're looking for a position in Atlanta, two of the biggest companies based there are going to be Home Depot and Coca-Cola. So looking for organizations based on where their particular geographic location might be would be a good way to do it. And for a lot of us, and for a lot of people on this call, you are at a particular point in your career where perhaps there are vendors or clients of previous organizations you've worked for that might have some correlation to your previous experience. those can be organizations that you might want to target for different types of opportunities. Traditionally, we've also, at least within my office, curated a couple of lists that might be of interest to you. And just so that we're clear, I will be sharing these slides with Alexandra, so that way you can click through some of these links. At least for Tandon, we've created lists of companies and job titles that some of our students have previously gotten. Even if you're at a more advanced level in your career, these can still be companies that you target for positions in your particular function, and even in industries you're interested in, because you know they've hired NYU students and NYU alumni in the past. And additionally, if you're new to a specific industry, we've curated a list of different companies by industry, so that way you can use this list to help start building out your own personal target company list. Beyond that, another way besides just targeting specific companies for opportunities is to also be looking at traditional job boards. These are some of the more general job boards that I recommend, and they also have links to each particular site. You have access to Handshake through NYU Wasserman. If you're a Tandon alumni, you have access to my site, Tandon Connect. Traditionally, I always go to LinkedIn and Indeed first when it comes to specific opportunities. But if you're interested in positions in different technology careers, and even for organizations that are a bit smaller, I also recommend sites like AngelList and Uncubed, which are great to find technology startups in New York City and other places around the country. And another very important thing when it comes to using some of these particular sites, if you're trying to create, if you're trying to reach an activity point where you are applying for a large number of positions on a given week-to-week basis, it takes time to log into each one of these sites, when you have time on a Monday or on a Tuesday or whatever it might be. I would highly recommend each one of these particular sites has the functionality for you to create email alerts for different types of positions you're searching for. Let's say, for example, you're looking for a construction project manager position. If that is one of the search terms that you use when it comes to your particular job search, in each one of these particular sites, I would save that search, and you can get emails coming to you daily, weekly, however often you would like, that match that criteria. And those will always be new positions that are posted. I highly recommend, pouncing on a position as soon as you see it, because we never know how many people are going to go after that and if you can get yourself to the front of the line for those applications, that might actually help you get calls for those types of opportunities sooner than you think. So that'll save you time with searching for different positions. It'll help you speed up your process and might result in a few more calls. Simple things like that can make a world of difference when it comes to your search. And considering that we have a number of alumni from different sectors and different industries, I've also curated a list of different professional associations and curated job boards for different industries that you might find interesting to look for different types of opportunities. So we will definitely include this in the follow-up that we send later. Another very important piece of your search is keeping track of the opportunities you apply to. I want us to think about our job search in a very systematic, and deliberate kind of way. Anytime that you apply for a position, we should have some type of spreadsheet or some type of document where we're keeping track of what we're applying to. Though the types of information you can include for that document include the date you've applied for that position, the company name, job title, a link to the actual job description. If you become one of those job seekers who applies for a large number of positions, I've seen this happen where people get calls back from a recruiter about a position and they don't recall actually applying for it. If we have this kind of spreadsheet to reference, it'll be very easy for us to even look for that position. And if you want to have an impromptu call with that recruiter, it'll be easier for you to pull up information to reference during that call. If there's additional information we can find with regards to salary information, what materials we've sent, what part of the process we're in, if we've applied, if we've been rejected, if we're interviewing for it, just some kind of tool to keep track of your search is going to help you reference things when they come up. And if you're trying to set clear goals for yourself in terms of, I want to apply for this many positions per week, I know that life is what happens while we're busy making plans. There might be times where you have a plan to apply for a number of positions in a given week, then some things come up. And if you come back to it later on the week and you find, oh, I've only applied to a certain number of opportunities, this visualization can be motivation for you to hit that goal with the time you have to devote to your search. So this is going to be a wonderful way for you to achieve those particular goals, keep track of things, and then know exactly where you stand with your search as that part progresses. Even when we're putting ourselves out there, when we are reaching out for different types of opportunities, obviously, we also want to have a good brand message in place about ourselves and our experience that is interesting to employers and might help us land interviews for positions. That's the whole point of applications, is getting interviews. This particular example for a resume, I will be the first to tell you that it's not universal. This one is more geared towards a student because that's the traditional population that I work with. But I think that the key takeaways that might be useful for this particular audience, number one, when you are writing about your experience, you want to make sure that you keep things consistent. If you highlight numbers or percentages, let's say you were going to write the number 2. If you wrote it like the number 2, or if you spelled it out TWO, make sure that the way that you write those things is consistent throughout your resume to keep your brand message consistent. Secondly, the most important thing that I believe an employer looks for on any resume, no matter what level you are at in your career, is the practical application of your experience to the position that you are applying for. For a lot of us here, a lot of that experience is going to come from having worked in industry from a number of years. For some of our students who are a bit more junior in their careers, that experience could be a combination of work you've done, research, academic projects, a whole combination of things. That any kind of experience you have that demonstrates how knowledge you've learned from any kind of professional experience you have is applicable to the kind of position you're highlighting or you're going for, is going to be what you want to highlight on your resume. In terms of how you structure writing some of that experience, we want to make it very clear, like what some of our day-to-day responsibilities are, some detail about projects we work on, and the size and scope of those projects, including, if it's an industry specific thing, what the budget for that project might be, how it's going to affect the client, things of that nature. And then most importantly, results. Results, in my mind, are when can really be characterized on a resume in terms of percentages and dollar figures. Anytime that our work has a clear-cut positive monetary gain for a company or saves a company money within the context of that work, or anytime we increase an efficiency by a certain percentage or decrease something inefficient by a certain percentage, that is how we highlight our true value for a new organization. Within the context of whatever work I do, these are my responsibilities. This is the nature of the work that I've done. And even in a management capacity, the size of the teams that I've led, the types of projects we've worked on, and the net results and the value that we've been able to provide for the organizations that I've worked for before. If we can create a coherent message that includes all of that material, then we are leaving nothing on the table for an organization to be confused about our experience or to see how we might be a good fit for the particular opportunity we're going after. I would also say that the whole thing here is to demonstrate value for an organization, leadership ability, to give them a clear idea of different technical tools and concepts that you're familiar with and how you've demonstrated them in the real world. Those are the important things to highlight on the resume. And finally, for a lot of us here, we might be more experienced than traditional student. So if you have 10 or more years of working experience, I believe that we should only go back about 10, at max 15 years on our resume, because I think that those experiences, with the way that the nature of work has changed with the advent of new technologies and new systems, those experiences will be the most relevant for the kinds of positions we're applying for today. And also, another thing, my personal opinion is that for a lot of this people on this particular call, if you are more experienced, at max, like you can have your resume go on 2 pages once you reach a certain level of experience, but I would not go any further than that, no matter how experienced you are. So that's my take when it comes to a resume. If you have more specific questions about that, I'll be happy to answer them in the future. For this particular slide is just, a few like general do's and don'ts. I would say, I don't think we would have any issue with this for this particular group, but just one thing I always harp on is not to exaggerate details. One other thing to consider is that anything you put on your resume you should be able to talk about in detail during the course of an interview. So let's not exaggerate dollars or figures if we can't, talk about it in a very detailed and confident manner. We don't want to use excessive professional jargon. So that way it's not just, we want to make it conversational, but still professional in the same time. So there's a balance to be struck there. And we want to always make things action specific, action result specific. So those are the main points that will come to your resume. With the cover letter, I personally have different opinions when it comes to a cover letter. In my opinion, I think that it's a necessary evil from time to time. The way to look at it is it's going to be your specific introduction to a specific company. So even using this particular example as a template to use, in the first paragraph of a cover letter, the main things you're trying to do are to address the position, introduce yourself, and give the company a reason why you like them. Giving the company a reason why you like them is going to be something you use to personalize every cover letter. The reason why you would like and apply for a position at Spotify would be different than the reason why you apply to a position at Tesla. 2 different companies, 2 different businesses, and being able to specifically say, I like your company because of the work you do in this particular field is a way to personalize it. In the middle portion of the cover letter, what you're doing is you're giving specific examples of your experience that relate to the needs of the position. Projects you've worked on, tools and technical competencies you have, and results. Cherry pick things that you feel are going to be the most relevant for that position. If you apply for a lot of positions that are similar to each other in terms of the responsibilities, and you find that you're recycling the same examples for different cover letters, if they're for the same type of position and the responsibilities for those types of positions are fairly similar, I think that's perfectly fine. But if there's ever an opportunity for you to change it and to cherry pick different things to make it more personalized, we definitely want to do that. But at the very least, we want to be personalizing the reasons why we like that particular organization. And I think just the last part is a very straightforward, thank you for your time and consideration. I look forward to hearing from you soon. Sincerely, whatever your name is. Again, we want to be tailoring these things for the needs of that particular position, cherry picking examples, and not making the cover letter like the biggest deal in the world, because some companies won't even require it anymore. But if it's a position where it's required, or if it's a position with a company that you really love and you really want to stand out, that's when I would put these steps into place and actually utilize it for your search. The next part is going to be LinkedIn. There are multiple ways to create a successful LinkedIn profile. I think some of the basics we want to have here are, number one, you definitely want to have a professional photo of yourself, or even if you don't have a professional one, even a selfie of you against a blank background, dressed business casual will be sufficient. Your profile is 5 times more likely to be viewed if you have a picture. Your headline should be kind of describing who you are as a professional and what you're good at. You could say something like, proven mechanical engineering professional with 15 years of project management leadership. Something along those lines, just to kind of demonstrate your value and encapsulate it into a very quick blurb, is going to be very important. And then from there, your LinkedIn summary, if you ever have heard of the elevator pitch, if someone were to ask you, tell me about yourself, what would you want to say? This is more like a written long form version of that, where you could say something more about like the kind of professional you are, what areas of expertise you have in your particular field, and reasons why you like the work you do. If you're a computer science professional, you could say something like, proven software engineering leader with 10 years of experience managing complex, front-end user projects, experience with, quality assurance testing, writing production level code, leading teams, and demonstrated passion for leveraging technology to help people connect with, new ideas or something along those lines. That's a quick encapsulation of the kind of professional you are, what you're good at, and why you like the work you do. All elements you want to include in your LinkedIn summary. When you're describing your work experiences on LinkedIn, a common question that I get is, can I just copy and paste what I've written on my resume, or should I write it differently? They're going to be written fairly similar to each other. There might be an opportunity to go into more detail about some of the tools you used and some of the results you get that you didn't have room for on your resume, because people might spend a little bit more time on your LinkedIn profile. But if they're written fairly similarly to each other, I don't think that's much of an issue. You also, for a lot of us here who are more advanced, if you have different skills like project management or marketing and communications, like demonstrated professional skills, whether they're hard or soft skills, make sure that you at least have the top 3 included on your profile and visible for someone who's reading your profile. And if you have individuals in your network, people you've worked with or people you've studied with who can endorse you for some of those skills, just to say, hey, I say that I'm good at communications and 10 people have backed me up on that, that'll look good too. And another very important thing is going to be recommendations. If you can have individuals who you've worked with academically or professionally write small summaries about how you've worked together and how you've been able to achieve positive results together, that'll make your profile look even more robust and be a nice way to round all those particular things out. So as much as you can do with your particular profile to move that forward, please do. And if anyone ever wants to take a look at my profile, I'm not going to say that mine's the best in the world, but I've curated it a lot for a long time, and it has a lot of these elements here just for some inspiration. Feel free to connect with me and be happy to take a look at it and use it for your own purposes. And then once we actually have that profile in place, especially now we're still kind of trying to run a job search and participate in some of these activities during COVID, networking virtually is going to be a very important part of our search. The whole idea here is making connections with people at different organizations that might be able to help us lead to interviews. I think the more directly you know someone, the more direct you can be with your outreach to them. So that's why one of the first places to look is to leverage the relationships you already have. You could start with family members, former colleagues, people who you've studied with if you're a recent graduate, professors, friends of friends, people who know you a little bit more directly, who you can be more honest with and say, I'm in the market for a new opportunity. I'd love to learn more about if your company's hiring in this particular area, if you know of people who I might be able to speak to learn more about their work and how I can help them. Those can be connections you can leverage immediately. And at least for us too, you can still reach out to people who maybe you don't have an interpersonal relationship now. If there's other alumni from NYU, if there are people, even if there are people who are working in industry in similar capacities, you should never be afraid to send an invitation to someone to say, I would love to connect with you and learn more about your work in your company. That is the main thing that we're doing first when it comes to networking. We're trying to reach out to conduct what we call informational interviews with individuals. And I'll tell you more, like this particular blurb is something that everyone can repurpose for that particular type of outreach. Reaching out to someone and saying, whether they're an alumni of NYU, or even if there's someone who's working at a company in an industry you're interested in, to ask them, I'd love to learn more about your work and your company. Do you have time for a 20-minute Zoom call in the coming days where I can ask you a few more questions about that? And this is especially good for people who might be thinking about a career change, because one of the best ways to learn about well, what the day-to-day of one of those new careers looks like and what it takes to succeed and get into that field is from people who are working in that industry. So this is definitely something I would never want you to be afraid of. Just some protocol things. If you reach out to someone this way and they accept, but they don't reach back out to you to schedule something immediately, you can follow up with them in a day or two to say, I really appreciate the opportunity to connect. Would still love to have this conversation. Would you be free? The trick that I use sometimes is like, if you give them a couple of times where you might be free, it's kind of like a subconscious thing to force someone to say, oh yeah, I'm free on this day. And that might lead to a more successful conversation. So once you actually get to a point of an informational interview, what am I asking and how is this going to help me with my search? If we have our side of the house taken care of, there's a few different ways this might work. The first thing you can ask someone is, can you tell me about yourself and how you got into this industry? Put them on your level, ask them more about where they got started and how they've moved forward. And the next thing you want to ask is, can you tell me more about your role and what you do day to day? Even if you have an understanding of that, this is especially good for career changers. This is a good way to kind of get an idea of what that person does, what some of the tools they use are, and things that you might need to learn to be successful there. If you want to also connect with someone a little bit more, my next question, this is my favorite one. What are some blind spots you encountered when you first got started in this industry and how did you adjust to them? Being able to ask, to say someone now that even if you're a bit more experienced, what are some things that have been important to your work that you had to adjust to that you didn't really anticipate, and how did you adapt to all of that? You can also ask those people if there are additional areas that you should look at in your research, additional types of companies or different types of roles that you might be interested in. And finally, are there 2 additional people that they recommend you speak to? And if you reach out to them, may you use their name? This will help you expand your network more organically because you will repeat this same process. How this can help us with our search: we're in the market for potential referrals, even with people who we don't know directly. If we connect with someone about, I'm interested in learning more from you, that puts us more on equal footing. And we have the questions that we want to ask. But I've seen plenty of times from one of these types of conversations where someone asks, oh, well, can you tell me more about your experience? What opportunities are you interested in? Oh, our company is actually hiring for some of these things. I've seen people get referred to opportunities organically. But at the very least, what will happen here is that this person will now become part of your network. If you see a good opportunity at their company, a week or 2 after you've had this conversation, I don't think it would be unprofessional for you to reach out to them at that point to say, you gave me some really good advice a couple of weeks ago about your company and what I should look at. I've actually come across a role. Do you know who the right people behind that position might be? And if I reach out to them, when I reach out to them, I'd love to learn more about what they're doing and how I can help them. That's another important tool, another important point to include as well. Anytime that you're reaching out to a company, it's about what value you feel you can bring for them, or being curious and inquisitive about what you can do for the organization within the context of an opportunity you see. Because if you're providing value and showing an interest in helping the company, that'll help you stand out from other job seekers who are just saying, I'm interested, let's talk more. Some people don't go beyond that. I would like all of us to, and that would be the way that I would do it. The whole idea here with leveraging LinkedIn is to build your own personal brand. If you want to connect with other people too, you could share relevant articles, comment on people's posts, put your own content out there. People are looking for more than just, you can connect with people about opportunities, but you can also cultivate your own knowledge and demonstrate your own expertise in different areas as a way to make connections. So with that, I will be happy to answer any questions you might have about job search process and anything of that nature. I see we already have a couple in the chat. Lynn was asking about, what about nonprofit organizations too? Lynn, can you be a little bit more specific with relation to that question? And then I can also answer your question about phone call versus Zoom.
Sure. Do you want me to speak? Is that okay?
Yes, that would be lovely. Thank you. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Well, I work in the nonprofit sector. I changed over from the for-profit sector after 20 years to the nonprofit because I'm at a different point in my career. So the
Mhm.
nonprofit approach is slightly different than the for-profit approach. While
Yeah,
there's many similarities, and I just noticed in your list, you didn't list any nonprofit resources.
right. The biggest nonprofit website is going to be idealist.org. In the meantime, there's also another site that I love called Volunteer Match, where if you're looking for projects or ways to get involved with those types of organizations that could lead to positions, that's a
Mhm.
great resource for you to tap into to look for additional types of experiences. Traditionally, the only reason why it's not on my curated list is because most of my students are interested in for-profit opportunities, but those would be good resources to utilize if you're in that particular sector.
Okay, thank you. I'm familiar with Idealist. And the other one was Volunteer Match, you said?
Yes, that's more for pro bono opportunities, but
Okay,
those could be good. And this is actually a resource that
networking.
might be, yeah, it's good for networking. It's also good for a lot of people here who might have gaps on their resume. If you have skills in certain industries like strategy or technology, those might be some pro bono projects you can work on while you're looking for a job to kind of plug any gaps you have on your resume. And it could be great ways to network with people who might have connections to other companies and industries too.
Okay. And I guess I'm just going to plug in for nonprofits because making the transfer from the for-profit world to the nonprofit world, the skills you bring from a for-profit to the nonprofit are incredible, but also I think there's just so much to learn from the nonprofit sector as
Yes.
well. And you can also
Yeah.
transfer back to the for-profit. So
It's more
um,
mission-driven work, and also because some of those organizations are a little bit leaner in terms of their operation and their staff. I mean, there's some organizations like Red Cross or universities that operate
correct.
large scale organizations. But I think that working in that field, it gives you the opportunity to wear many different types of hats and gain more of a generalist skill set that you can then tailor for specific opportunities you look for in the for-profit sector too.
And salaries aren't always as low as you think.
No.
There's always that that sense that,
Yep.
oh, I'm in the development side, the sales
Yeah.
side. So
Of course. So that's a plug. If anyone's ever interested in those kinds of opportunities, I wouldn't discount them at all. And this kind of moving on to your other question, just with this particular, just to recap, you're also asking like if a phone call would suffice instead of a Zoom, just in case we're dealing with someone who's a little bit less technically inclined.
well, not just technically inclined. I
Mhm.
find often with the Zoom, you have, people are more concerned about their backgrounds or what they're wearing, or there's distractions if a dog walks into the room or something, or sounds in the background. Whereas I found a lot of people just with phone calls are fine with a phone call, and it may actually take less of their time if you're
Mhm.
asking them for a favor. So I was just wondering your thoughts on that, but that also could be a generational thing with me.
Well, it's not even so much a generational thing. I prefer Zoom because I always liked the face-to-face interaction when it comes to networking. And also the ability, even though this is that when you're talking to someone face-to-face, you can read their body language, you can see how interested they are in what you're saying, and sometimes you can even subconsciously adjust what your points are or what you're focusing on with the conversation, depending on how you see someone reacting to your points. So that's why in a COVID environment, it's not even just the generational thing, it's more like the opportunity to even be able to have some type of face-to-face interaction with someone, even if it's virtual, can't be discounted. But I also think that if you're talking about convenience, it wouldn't hurt to even just include the phone call option in any kind of outreach you put out there. So you give someone the option and you see what they take. I think either way it'll work out fine. But that's just my reasoning why I prefer a Zoom or some type of video call when we have the capability to use it.
Those points are really good, and some points I overlooked because, again,
Mhm.
the face-to-face, you can't, the body language is key. So thank you.
No problem. Oh, and just another quick thing too, even just a tip outside of this, a lot of times people have asked me about, well, if I can't have if I'm using Zoom or I'm using some type of video call platform, and maybe you're in an interview or maybe you're in a networking conversation, maybe you're even giving a presentation and you can't look your audience in the eye. I don't know if you've noticed with me, but there are times where I'm like looking at the side. So I'm looking at myself to see what my own body language and it's making me comfortable. But there are other times where I look directly at the camera in order to address people directly. This looking directly at the camera is kind of like the best substitute that I've seen for direct eye contact. So if you're ever in a situation where you're having a conversation with someone, whether it's for networking or for interviewing purposes, if you want to answer their question, make sure you're looking at the camera, because it'll be the next best thing to direct eye contact until we can get back to a point where you're having more in-person interactions with people. So that just brought up another good point. So thank you for bringing that up, Lynn. I appreciate it. Do we have other questions from the audience? I'm happy to answer anything with relation to topics we've covered, or even other job search related things that I can help you out with. Well, a question I would have for the audience is, what are some of the biggest challenges you've been encountering with your search? Has it been lack of interviews, performing well during the interviews you've had, how to brand yourself, anything like that? And if there's any detail about you specifically you want to share, I wouldn't be afraid to do that, because you might be encountering an issue that maybe one of your colleagues on this call is as well. So it might be beneficial for multiple people, even if it's directly related to you and your own personal search.
I'll volunteer a little bit. I guess
Sure.
I'm the talker today. I was one of 2 final candidates after about 7 interviews, and the majority of those were virtual Zoom group, started with phone. And what was challenging is, in the end, when I saw who got the job, because I saw it on LinkedIn, I did a search afterwards. I was curious to see who got hired in the local Los Angeles market. It made me realize that the person who ended up getting the job probably had already connections at the organization that I didn't. And so it helped me to remember I need to now reach out to my network more than I was. So for me, that was like a wake up call, that even if you make it down to 1 to 2 and all the signs are there, when you don't get it, it's incredibly disappointing. And it just helped me to have to refocus and re-strategize. So now I'm focusing more on that networking portion that you talked about. So I appreciate you covering that.
Not a problem. And I'm glad that we can reinforce that particular point. I'm all about making connections with people organically. Number one, a lot of questions I get about networking are, how will people react if I ever reach out? I don't think I've ever seen anyone quote unquote scolded for reaching out to someone, in the sense where you would get a message where someone's saying something like, this is unprofessional, why are you reaching out to me? Why aren't you going through the regular process? I think the worst outcome I've seen has been someone saying, unfortunately, I don't have the time to reach out or to connect with you more now, but maybe let's keep in touch in the future. That's why I think a volume approach is going to be a good thing. So the more people we can connect with, the increased likelihood we have of actually having one of these conversations. And again, even if it's with a complete stranger, if you can find some kind of common ground with having similar professional backgrounds or having an interest in their organization, and even if you take the approach where you ask them, are there things about my background that I could talk to you more about, or things that you're interested in, I might be able to assist you with, even offering that. Everyone here on this call we're professionals with a certain caliber, certain experiences. So if we want to make that networking more of a two-way street, even just asking what we can do for someone else, even if we're not sure when we reached out initially, can be a big game changer for us and help us to have a more detailed conversation with someone. So I really appreciate you bringing up that point, Lynn. Thank you. So our other colleague, Holly, had a question. Holly, if you can talk about tips for finding a remote job, you can unmute yourself. Do you have additional questions about that, or more about your experience that you want to share with me?
Sure. I have some personal needs to spend time in 2 cities for family reasons, and I'm about to initiate a job search, and I'm very focused on finding one that has flexibility so I can work remotely and be able to be in different places to support my family. So of course, needing to be upfront about that, but I know with the pandemic, remote jobs are increasing? Have you seen anything, recently more about that, or how you approach recruiters? Should we only be looking for remote, how do you identify remote jobs, or are there sometimes ones that you apply for and then go through the process and then discuss this?
I think one of the first starting points is that a lot of the job boards that we're using now are, even though it's not always 100% accurate, they're doing a much better job of being able to screen positions that are explicitly remote as opposed to ones that aren't. So sites like LinkedIn and Indeed have search criteria for remote positions. So I would make sure that any kind of the searching, I'm sorry, forgive me for being a little tongue-tied. Like before, when we were talking about setting up search alerts, being able to flag the ones that are remote is always going to be important. And secondly, I think with remote positions, what unfortunately that eliminates is the ability to connect with individuals who are like, one of the populations that I like to network with is people who are working in the same geographic areas of the companies we apply to, doing similar things, because they might be part of the interviewing process or connected with those particular positions. So what that necessitates, if you're looking for a remote position, is connecting with recruiters at that particular organization. So I would say, as long as if you're ever connecting with a recruiter, saying something like, even being more direct, I was very interested in this particular opportunity. Here's the value that I think I can bring to your organization. And I would love to speak with the people behind that role more to see how I can provide value for them and help them with the needs and challenges of that opportunity. That's going to be the main population I would target, and the messaging that I would send. I think in your particular case, you might need to be a bit more direct about why you're reaching out to someone. And even if it's more transactional, like you're hoping to move along in the process by reaching out to these people, as long as you're saying, I want to help your organization, that'll be a good way to lead in, even if you're connecting with someone you don't know. And I know another issue that comes up there is, well, what if I'm not connecting with the right recruiter? That's why I think you can connect with multiple recruiters at a company, and they might have a better idea of who the right person for that role is than we would, because we're not part of the organization. Does that answer your question?
That's helpful. Thank you.
No problem.
John, may I offer a comment, if you
Please.
don't mind? I guess I've been job searching. What I found too is on my one position, it was a home-based job before the pandemic. And that really stood out when someone reached out to me, because they said to me, I like that you have working from home experience prior to the pandemic. So I would just say, or encourage Holly, that showing the ability that you're comfortable with that, working remotely, and maybe that you have a dedicated office space for it or something, I have found has made people that I'm talking to comfortable, especially when I point out I've created a home office dedicated to working from home. Now that's a luxury that I fortunately have, but I also moved during the pandemic to have a 2-bedroom for that reason, knowing that this was going to go on for a while. So
perfect. Thank you for adding that.
There.
That's perfect. I like these kinds of interactions because I believe that we can learn from each other. It's not just, me talking down to everyone. It's like we're all on the same page and we can all learn from each other. So I appreciate that. Another question we had was from Kevin. It was more about some advice that I had before about, trying to focus your work experience on the last 10 to 15 years. If you have over 20 years of work experience, the question is, should I leave previous work experience off? I am actually inclined to say yes. They'll be able to see that experience on your LinkedIn profile. And again, you've probably heard this before, we only have a very, very short window of opportunity to have recruiters or hiring managers from different companies look at the experience on your resume. So that real estate is precious. So including the experiences we have that are more relevant and the details behind them about what we've done, what we've been able to accomplish, that'll be useful for that position, I think is the best use of that real estate. And even with that small thing, additional work experience, and even just listing some of those jobs in the years can all make it seem a little bit dated. So I would actually leave that off. Hope that answers your question. Dhruvi, that particular question, what would be the best way to network? I don't want to say, oh, well, we've already gone over that so far, but I do think some of the points we included before about having personalized conversations with people, putting out content on LinkedIn about what you find interesting and connecting with people that way, those are some of the better things to do. We do have a recording with all of that in case you joined us a little bit late, but there's no universal best way. There's just ways that work for us. And I think that if you're connecting with people about what you can do for them and showing interest in how you can help those companies will be the best way to network. I think we have time for maybe a couple more questions. Drew, can you articulate on this a little bit more if you don't mind?
Oh, yes. Yeah, sorry, I was trying to throw all that in, trying to keep
yeah, those
yeah,
are just hard for me
too
to
much,
read. Yeah. But please go ahead.
Yeah, no problem. Like, I guess as far as like, what should be highlighted if you're, when you're choosing like a new career path, like, I'm just, I guess something like I was just using that as an example, like, being in a telecommunications industry for, 12 years, or telecommunications area, and, worked for, various companies, from like a couple of years work, from financial to pharmaceutical, and now in education, and how and after recently graduating to I guess getting a master's in something that you were looking to pursue, but you didn't have that skill or understanding of that environment, like as for example like enterprise risk management. So someone that that got some got a degree to something that they could have like a starting point to pursue maybe some kind of like I guess risk management or something in the risk area. What would you say I guess what would what would be highlighted I guess in your resume if it's for like a career path change to something that would pertain to something you got?
Well, I guess I want to try to make this as applicable to everyone as possible. If you're making a career change, the first thing you want to think about is what aspects of my work, projects I've worked on, day-to-day skills, even skills like project management or leadership, what experiences do I have from my previous career that are the most highly transferable to my new career? So that way, if I'm writing my experience on my resume, I'm putting those bullet points first to highlight what's most transferable. That's number one. Two, if you're just transitioning and you learned in most of your experience with your new career is academic in nature, you want to put things like projects or self-directed learning that you've done, demonstratable ways that you've worked on that experience, even if it's not professional in nature, it's still applicable. You want to put those things first on your resume, even above your working experience, because those are the things that are most related, the most domain related experiences you have related to your new career. And then lastly, even just besides what you put on your resume, I would be networking heavily with people, because you have an idea. Once you have this down on paper, you have an idea of what you want to say about yourself. The more people you can tell the story to in networking events, connecting about positions, the better off someone will be like, yeah, you have a good skill set here. We are open to someone with your background. Let's talk more. And I would even be targeting maybe smaller companies in that particular industry, because I think they'll be more open to people who might have a varied skill set, because they can see the value there more than like a more established company that is only looking, is a very myopic view of what they want from a position like that. So those are some ways to adjust your strategy and still find success for your particular position in your particular scenario. And hopefully that's applicable to other people going through that too. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Yeah. Yes, it does. Yeah, that makes sense, because I know, like, I guess coming out of like thinking about, okay, someone just graduated recently that had either experience or no professional experience, and like say someone's applying for an analyst position. Mostly those cases are they want someone new on board that may It could be someone that just graduated, has no experience whatsoever. They come on board and though they're willing to train them, you may have like, okay, communication skills, you have project skills,
Mhm.
you have some technical skills of the basics because you went around, like say you did some LinkedIn learning courses you took on your own initiative that helped you understand like the industry. Like I know what you said, but it's important to also do research on the company that you're applying for, so that way you could get a good understanding of how they work, and also knowing about the position that you're applying for, so that way you could relate to when they ask you questions about it, at least you're familiar with the basic concepts, and having known the basics at least helps will help you, because it'll show that, hey, this person took the time to research and know more about the position, so that makes a lot of sense.
Perfect. Perfect.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Wonderful. No problem. I think the last thing we can talk about here is going to be the salary negotiation process. This is something I usually try to address with people on an individual basis. My take on the salary negotiation process is that some practical tips for it. Number one, it should never be done over email. It should always be a direct conversation between you and either the hiring manager or recruiter. So that way you can have a more person-to-person interaction. Secondly, research is going to be extremely important. If you're looking for a higher salary, research about not just about like what the industry standard is, but what the range for that might be from that particular organization. And then having points related to your ability to do that position, asking for justification of why you would be asking for more because of the value you can bring to an organization, your work ethic, your dedication to the organization, things like that will be extremely important. I personally never want to be the kind of person who haggles, in the sense where, yeah, some people look at the totality of a job offer and say, oh, well, what would happen if I asked for $10,000 more per year in annual salary, but I told the company I'm willing to take a week's less vacation or something along those lines. I personally never really focus on that too much. My focus is more on why would increasing my compensation to this particular level, how would that benefit the company? And I always think that negotiating in good faith is going to be a good thing too. There's always going to be what we ask for, what the company is willing to offer, and then somewhere in the middle. I think that if a company does come up, even if it's not exactly what we were asking for, but it's close enough, we have to really ask ourselves, is the company showing some good faith here? Is this something I'm willing to move forward with? And of course, depending on how important this is for you, if the company can't match that, and it's really an extremely important part for you, you always, like, the worst case scenario is that you'd have to be willing to walk away from an offer to find something better that was more along the lines of your value and your worth for an organization. But at the end of the day, I've rarely seen that happen. So I think that if we try to keep that process in that particular lane using some of those tips, then it'll work out for us the way we need it to. I think with that, we might be good to go.
Thank you so much. That was very helpful.
Thank you, John, for your presentation. This concludes session 2 of Engineering Your Job Search. Please save the date for Alumni and Parents Weekend, taking place October 21st through the 24th. We thank you all for your participation and hope you have a wonderful day.